Welcome. This is session number 15. And today we're going to be looking at some more biblical backgrounds for the period of the late divided kingdom and beyond. So by late divided kingdom, I mean the period roughly 841. I'm starting with Jehu. Because you have to start somewhere. And that's kind of where the slides ended up. And we'll go down to the fall of the northern kingdom, which happens in 722. And I hope to go on into the period where Judah was by herself. We'll see how much we can get done. This is good stuff. For those who don't know, I'm Dr. John McMath. I'm joined by my friends in Italy and in the Philippines, and we're working through a whole bunch of study to help church leaders do a better job of it. That's what this is all about. Let's continue. I'm going to see if I can share this screen, and we'll do the late divided kingdom. Yeah, okay. We'll start off with King Jehu. Now, we don't know a whole lot about Jehu except what's in the Bible, which is quite a bit. Let's see if I can get this over here, out of the way. 841 BC. We're quite sure of the dates on all of these northern and southern kings. If I give you a date like 841, I'm really sure of it. We're right down to, frankly, we can tell you just about the month of the year in which Jehu became king, but 841. He became the king of the northern kingdom of Israel, and he's famous for purging the kingdom of Baal and Asherah worship, but he was not a particularly good guy. Jehu became king and purged the house of King Ahab. So Jehu essentially starts a new dynasty and wipes out the entire house of Ahab. The story of his slaughter of all the priests of Baal and Asherah and his slaughter of the house of Ahab is a bit disgusting. Jehu was not a nice guy, and he was certainly not a godly man. But in some important ways, he followed the instructions of Elijah and Elisha, and that's recounted for us in 2 Kings 9. And again, not a very pretty picture, but it is what it is. Let me see if I can find my cursor here. There we go. Okay. When Jehu became king, Chalmenezer came back. King Chalmenezer was a king of Assyria, and there was no coalition this time. Earlier, there had been a coalition of Syria and Israel and others to meet him at Karkar, and the battle didn't go well for the Assyrians. They stopped there. This time there was no coalition, and it didn't go as well for Israel. The king of Damascus opposed the Assyrians, but thousands of troops were apparently lost. The siege of Damascus is famous. It left the territory in ruins. We can still find the archaeological remains of that destruction today. The city survived, but there's a burn layer at that point. Shalmaneser then moved further to the west, and along the way, he did what the Assyrian kings usually did. He collected tribute from a variety of kings, including Jehu. And we know that because of this famous stele. This is called the Chalmenezer stele, strangely enough, sometimes called the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser. And what you see on here is pictures and a text in cuneiform relating Shalmanezer's campaign and the various kings who paid him tribute and the amounts of tribute in terms of camel loads of whatever that was given to him. The panel that is significant for our purposes is this one. As the date is 841. We also know the dates of the kings of Assyria, and we know which years. The Assyrians kept a record called the day books. The day books are a record of what happens every day that is significant for the king of Assyria. It's like here in America, and I imagine in Italy and in the Philippines, the head of state receives a morning briefing of kind of clippings from the news, everything that's important that you need to know about today. And the Assyrian kings got somewhat the same thing. And we have a permanent record of that carved in stone or in clay tablets for all of the years from about 950 BC down through about 640 BC. During all of those years, there's with some gaps, but generally very, very well laid out. We've got the daily briefings for the kings of Assyria. And among other things, on such and such a day, such and such a month of such and such a year, King Chalmenezer, he received tribute from the following kings, this one and this one and this one and this one, and Jehu is mentioned among them. And this particular stele, this obelisk, has King Jehu kneeling at the feet of King Shalmaneser. So the kneeling character is King Jehu. This is not a good look. There's no way that that's a good thing. What it does is, for our purposes, it provides confirmation. So Jehu is not one of my favorite kings. He was a cruel guy who wiped out Baal worship. So he's kind of a mixed blessing. And I definitely don't preach about King Jehu because he's not a nice guy. And his story is very much a mixed bag. But here he is, pictured with King Shalmaneser, and the year is 841. So that gives us a hard date on the chronology of Israel and the chronology of the Assyrians. Because of this synchronism and dozens of others like this, we have really, really good readings on all of these dates. When you hear scholars of a liberal persuasion saying that all of the dates in the Bible need to be taken with a grain of salt, they're wrong. The dates are really well established. And I used to say that they're well established back to the time of the beginnings of the Israelite kingdom with Saul and David. And now, with the new publications coming out from Egypt, I can track dates down to the day of the month, all the way back to the time of Abraham. It's remarkable what is being done with, for instance, astronomy. The astronomic dating in Egypt is very important. It's called the Sothic dating, the star of Soth, whichever star that is, and I'm not even sure which one that is. But it would arise every month, and that was a big deal because it was the beginning of a lunar month, and the astronomers in Egypt kept track of the location of the Sothic rise every month, and kept very careful track of that. And because of that, we know when the new moons were, all the way back into the time of Abraham. Fascinating stuff. That allows us, among other things, to know when the Passover happened. The actual departure from Egypt, it had to be 1446 BC, because that's when the new moon happened at the right time. It's exactly the right place. So the chronology, frankly, most of my students find the chronology boring. I get excited about the chronology, about all of the dating, because dates and date frameworks and synchronisms between different nations are the very stuff of history. This is what it's about. This is of authentic, genuine, honest to goodness history. Always comes with dates. Fairy tales start off once upon a time, or a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. That's not the Bible. The Bible tells us King Jehu did this, and when we look in the history books, we find inscriptions of King Jehu doing that. The Bible is to be understood primarily as accurate historical documentation. Okay, let me, enough of that. That's kind of fun, but let's go on. Queen Athaliah and King Joash of Judah happens about the same time as King Jehu. Athaliah pops up at this point in the Davidic lines because Jehoshaphat made an alliance with Israel, and she, Athaliah, is an Israelite princess. So Jehoshaphat made an alliance, ended up marrying Athaliah. She saw that her son Ahaziah was dead. Happened at the hands of King Jehu. And so she rose and destroyed all the royal offspring. Only one male grandchild survived, whose name was Joash, who is also the son of Ahaziah. And he was protected for a while by Jehu the priest. Total is 6 years. And so we have that story. This photograph was taken up on the Temple Mount, and I've forgotten why I used that particular picture. I think I like the colors of all these tourists. It looks to me like they're from Korea or Thailand or someplace colorful. Anyway, they look like they're having a good time up there. So Athaliah managed a coup, and Joash was put on the Davidic throne. Jehoiada probably exercised quite a bit of real authority during the next 10 years or so. Joash was only 7 when he came to the throne, and he started out with some reforms, which are probably Jehoiadas, the high priest's influence over him. But after that time, Joash turned to idolatry. Judah, of course, paid for the king's sin. That's always the way. The politicians have their corruption and the people pay the price. The Syrians invaded. They threatened Jerusalem, and Joash was forced to pay tribute. He died in disgrace, and he was not buried with the kings of Judah, which is a tomb there in Jerusalem. So a little bit we know about Joash. Jehoahaz made an alliance with Assyria. This is the Assyrian gate at Nineveh. And the alliance happened in 803 because the Syrian threat was a bad thing at the time. So you've got Jehoahaz of Israel making an alliance with Assyria. The king at that time of Assyria was a fellow by the name of Adad-Nirari. And he laid siege to Damascus. He imposed tribute on Damascus yet again. Never rebuilt the previous destruction. Just came and laid siege, did some more destruction, laid more tribute. The alliance that Jehoahaz arranged for involved paying more tribute. This episode is not referred to in the Bible except in passing. I think it gets one verse. The Assyrian records give us all of the details of this. So interestingly, in God's mind, in God's plan, this monumentally stupid act on the part of Jehoahaz was not all that important. The northern kingdom was going to be gone a mere 80 years after this. And in God's plan, that was already accomplished. All right, let's see here. The next king along, Jehoash, was the king of Israel about the same time as Amaziah of Judah, and both reigned a long time. Jehoash and Amaziah both managed to reign for about 40 years. They presided over a general peace and prosperity time in the two nations during a whole 40 years. So the first half of the 8th century, around 800 to around 750 or so BC. During this time, we see the beginning of a long decline of Syria. Syria has had its ups and downs all through history. Syria is one of the oldest nation states on the planet. It goes way, way back. Damascus is extremely old. I haven't been to Damascus, but this is a shot that I picked up somewhere along the street called Straight in Damascus. So Syria declined more and more with the death of King Hazael and the even less able son Ben-Hadad. And Jehoash was able to retake quite a number of northern cities, particularly in the Jordan Valley and in the Golan Heights that had been under Syrian control. Amaziah started out well, but again, he was not particularly a godly man. He defeated the Edomites and then began to worship the Edomite gods, for heaven's sakes. In punishment, which was predicted by a prophet, Amaziah went to war with Israel and was defeated at Bet Shemesh in Judah. The northern wall of Jerusalem was torn down, and Amaziah was taken hostage to Samaria. And this was followed by a long co-regency. Uzziah Uzziah is the son of Amaziah, and he began reigning instead of Amaziah in 792, and he would reign for about 50 years, down to 740 BC. So the book of Isaiah starts out in the year that King Uzziah died. So Uzziah is a fairly important character, and Amaziah was a co-regent, but he was, for the most part, a hostage in Samaria. That's not good. Okay, in the north, we've got Jeroboam II, who is presiding over something of a golden age for Israel in the north. King Uzziah over something of a golden age in the south in Judah. And this is a period of power for the whole people of Israel, north and south. And this photograph was taken at a place that was built during this time, the fortress of Arad in the Negev. Okay, yeah, I need to talk about Jeroboam first. Jeroboam II expanded his rule. He included Damascus and the southern part of Lebanon, of the Bekaa Valley. It's during this reign that some very famous things were produced. Inscriptions that we call the Samaria Ostraca. Potsherds used to record the arrival of wine and oil and other produce at the palace. And what we learned from the Samaria Ostraca is that there was considerable economic wealth, very large numbers of wine and oil and grains of various kinds and animals provided for food for the palace. This presumes that economically there was still quite a bit going on. It's interesting in the Samaria Ostraca that the tribal distinctions of Israel were still in existence among the people. They still knew who was from Issachar and who was Asher and who was Dan and so on. So each of the tribes would be paying their own portions. Who knew? The northern kingdom had not been particularly godly for forever, all the way from Jeroboam I. And prior to that, it seems like they hadn't had much enthusiasm for anything godly, but they maintained their Jewish heritage. Which is interesting because today there is still a group at Samaria who consider themselves the survivors of the Samaritans, who continue to consider themselves the true offspring of the Jews. Interesting people group, and we run into them in the New Testament. Back to King Uzziah, he reigned a long time, produced a lot of prosperity by subjecting the Philistines to servitude and controlling the Negev approaches to Judah. The Negev approaches would allow them to control the various caravan routes that were in the south. The Nabateans later on. are the inheritors of those caravan routes. But one of the outposts of King Uzziah was this fortress in Arad. Arad is south of, let's see how to say it, south of Hebron and east of Beersheba, out on a kind of a promontory overlooking the ancient city of Arad. There's an early Bronze Age city of Arad. We would like to find a late Bronze Age city of Arad, but we haven't found it yet. And this fortress dates to the time of the Iron Age, the time of the divided kingdom. So the fortress itself built around probably around 800 BC, and it's a time of prosperity. This is an interesting fortress for a variety of things. I'm going to stop this share and see if I can get the other one to come up. See if I can make this one go away. All right, and I've got to share again. And let's see here. That's okay, that's this one. Now we'll come up with presenter view. See if it will come up. Oh, look at there. There's that, there's the same picture without so much writing on it. This is clearly from the Iron Age. Clearly from the time of the kings of Judah. This is a diagram of the thing, and there are several different layers. The stratum 10 gate is way at the bottom of this diagram. That's what the picture is of. So that purple stuff all the way around is the Iron Age pattern, and that's what we're ultimately looking at. The lighter color, kind of a turquoise color, was built on top of that, and then there was a tower that was built here during the Hellenistic period, after the time of Alexander the Great. So it's got at least 3 different levels. There's a 4th level that's even older that we don't pay much attention to. In the next photograph, I'm going to be walking up onto the top of that Hellenistic tower to the upper right-hand corner of that tower that isn't really a very tall tower anymore, and looking down at a small area, and you can see it there, called the Israelite Temple. Okay, that's what I want to show you. Let's see if I can get it to work. Bingo. There's the view down into that Israelite temple. You can see the lower ancient city of Arad off in the distance, but right here in the foreground, you see this temple. The view from this tower gives us the whole corner. Right in the middle is the entrance gateway. This area is entered through a single solemn processional gateway. The Sacred Precinct, the whole holy area, is a rectangular space, roughly rectangular, and the near corner is where I'm standing, and then the walls go out in 2 directions, and you can see an altar made of rough stones on the right-hand side of this paved area. Just beyond the altar is a place for a laver. There's not much left of it, just a footing, so I don't have photographs here. Beyond the laver, there's a broad room, what we call the holy place, entered through that single door. At the far side of the broad room is a holy of holies, what we call a niche. And in that niche would normally in a pagan temple be found the idol. But this one is different. I'm going to show you a little more. We'll get a little closer. Here I am standing in the entranceway, and off to the right is that altar. We'll take another look at that sacrificial altar. You'll notice this is made of field stones. It's my student here is about 6 feet tall. And you can see there's just a one step that's left. There may have been more steps, but this is all we have. And this is a traditional, classic Israelite altar. They were supposed to be made of uncut stones. There were not supposed to be horns on the altar. When we find horns on an altar, that's usually an altar to Baal. When you find an altar that's made of cut stones, that's a pagan altar. This is one of the very, very few examples that we have in Israel of an actual Israelite altar. The same student is now standing in front of the Holy of Holies. Directly in front of him, the little carved platform that you see, like a little tabletop, is an altar of incense. And there were 2 of those. In the back of this Holy of Holies area, you can see 2 standing stones. These are the stones that contained copies of the 10 Commandments. You'll remember that the tabernacle and later on Solomon's temple had a box that we call the Ark of the Covenant, and in the box were, among other things, the tablets of the 10 Commandments. So the holy place in the temple and in this alternative temple does not contain a statue of God. The pagans would put a statue, an idol of their God in their temples. But God's people put a copy of God's word in the holy place. So the focus of Old Testament worship in a temple was to be the word of God. That's a fascinating thing. We don't bow down in front of idols because an idol is not God. An idol doesn't live or breathe or create anything. It does nothing. We worship the God who created heaven and earth. And we refuse to worship the created things. Instead, we worship under the authority of the words that God has given us. So that's a fairly important picture. There's fairly important stuff coming from this period of King Josiah. Let me see if I can get out of that one. Yes, that worked. And now I'm going to try to share again. This one, okay, share screen. Yeah, everything is so, this is more complicated. Back in the day, it was fairly easy to get from one place to another in Zoom. Now it's not so easy to get around in Zoom anymore. Okay, here we are. King Uzziah, Jeroboam, these guys. Okay. When we get down to the prophets of Israel, they all also have tracks that they've left behind. Amos and Hosea are among the earliest of the writing prophets. They both had a ministry in the north during the time of Jeroboam II. Both Amos and Hosea predict disaster for the north. They note the decadent wealth and the lack of concern for the poor, all kinds of bad things going on in the north. The seals that we see here provide us with lots and lots and lots of biblical names. This just gives us an example of the background that we have. And so, for example, the names Amos and Hosea come up on the seals. Usually, we can't identify the specific owner anymore. Once in a while we can, but hardly ever. But the names that we have in the Bible are, in fact, not made-up names. In many holy books, the Book of Mormon comes to mind. The names that are presented are made-up names. They're fiction. They have nothing to do with anyone. Here in the Bible, the names of people are the names that people actually had in biblical times. Names like Amos and Hosea actually have meaning within the language. And these meaningful names were names that parents actually gave their children in biblical times. And we know that because of the many seals that come from this period. The seals are very common during the Iron Age. We find a whole bunch of them during this period. This photograph is taken in the museum in Hatzor in northern Israel. Okay. The fall of Israel took place in 722. It actually took a little while. This is a photograph of Samaria on the right, and the Assyrian writing on the left is actually in Nineveh. That's a door frame in Nineveh. So anyway, 743, the Assyrian Empire began to gain power under a character by the name of Tiglath Polizer the third. Tiglath Polizer, one of my favorite characters because his name is just kind of, it's this 12-cylinder name. And my students always have trouble with who. And interestingly enough, his name was often shortened in the Bible, and he's called Pul, P-U-L, or Pulu, instead of Tiglath-Pileser. He was, like so many of the Assyrians, he was a ruthless tyrant. He used terror to extract tribute all over the ancient world. His enemies who resisted were either killed or deported or whatever. Well, when Samaria began to rebel against the Assyrians, that this is what's going to happen. Tiglath-Pileser seems to have been the Assyrian tyrant who invented the practice of deporting his enemies. By doing this, he was able to continue to extract tribute from them in a whole new location. He just simply picked them up and moved them 1,000 miles away to somewhere else. He took them out of their native land, all of their surroundings, and all of their connections to the land and to other peoples. And he hoped to break their will to resist. He hoped that they would become simply vassals of Assyria. In 727 BC, Tiglath-Pileser died, which is not a sad thing for maybe anybody except his mom. And he was replaced by his son, Chalmenezer the fifth. They all had 9-cylinder names. A lot of city-states revolted at that point, including Samaria under a king named Hoshea. Most were quickly brought back in line, but Hoshea made a contact with Egypt and stopped paying tribute. That was the big mistake. the Assyrian king laid siege to Samaria. Chalmenezer himself survived to begin the siege, but his son who survived him, Sargon II, who has a handy name for a change, ended the siege in 722 with the utter destruction of the northern capital, the deportation of essentially the entire population. There were a few survivors who stayed in the area, but Sargon also exported large numbers of peasants from other parts of the Assyrian Empire into Samaria. And those people lived in that area and intermarried with the local tribal people, including the Jews, and became a mixed people group. The Samaritan people to this day are a mixed people group that dates back to the fall of Israel, 722 BC. So what's happening in Judah during all this time? Uzziah, of course, was a pretty good king. He supported the worship of God. And we see a few bits and pieces from the time of King Uzziah around 750 or 760 BC. This little bitty pomegranate is found today in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. This pomegranate is about, let me see if I could remember here, not quite 1 centimeter long. So half an inch, the size of your fingernail. It's a tiny little thing, very carefully carved from a hard stone. And it was apparently one of many, many, many of these things that served as tassels on some decorative item within the temple. So this is one of the few artifacts that we have of the first temple in Jerusalem. A lot of that is just gone. It went away, but we do still have this little bit. Okay, after the fall of the northern kingdom, Judah was all by herself, and we have quite a lot of detail from Judah's solo time. King Hezekiah was the southern king. He followed his father Uzziah. So you've got Uzziah, then King Hezekiah. Hezekiah is a pretty good guy, and he operated under the prophet Isaiah. So Hezekiah and Isaiah go right together. We know that from 722 until 586, Judah was pretty much alone in the world, while Assyria rose to greater and greater power until it finally was wiped out altogether by the Babylonians. Okay, so the Assyrians gained power and gained power and gained power and just made enemies. They made more and more enemies all over the place until they were finally completely defeated in 612 through 609 BC and replaced by the Babylonians. During this period, the Assyrians were a great danger, and the photograph on the left is the interior of a tunnel dug by King Hezekiah. I mentioned before that the water system of Jerusalem has always been a very important thing. Without water, you die rather rapidly. So the ancient city of Jerusalem used the water from the spring Gihon, and the Jebusites got their water when they were under siege by hauling it up through that horrible shaft, the water shaft. Hezekiah tried to simplify that. The tunnel he dug is an S-shaped, slightly sloping tunnel, just about tall enough to walk in, hand cut for about half a kilometer underground, as much as 300 feet, 100 meters under the surface of the southern city of Jerusalem. And it runs from the spring Gihon all the way to the Siloam Pool. And this is my wife standing next to the Siloam Pool. Oh, lo, these 35 years ago. She's still pretty. Still looks good in shorts. It's kind of fun. But there's the Siloam Pool. That's the same pool that is mentioned in the New Testament. One very important principle is that water features hardly ever move. If there's a spring mentioned in the Old Testament, it's probably still there. It's probably there in New Testament times. They just changed some of the structures around it. But this is sometimes called the Siloam Tunnel. It's sometimes called the Gihon Tunnel. Usually it's called Hezekiah's Tunnel. And it was built to make Jerusalem secure from attack, and probably helped when Sennacherib attacked. King Sennacherib is the next important character in the Assyrian story. And his attack happened in the summer of 701 BC. He laid siege to and destroyed numerous towns in Judah, but one of the most prominent was Lachish. And this is the place that I helped to excavate back in 1985. There's Lachish in the background. And on the left, you see the siege ramp, which was my specialty. I dug in the siege ramp. This thing on the right is an Assyrian chalice. It was made for worship of their gods. And the depiction there is of a ladder going up to defeat a city. This is what the Assyrians did. This was their thing. The laying of sieges was fairly common, but the siege of Lachish was so important that Sennacherib actually decorated his palace, one of his palaces in Nineveh, with a multi-panel relief, a stone-cut relief that is currently found in the British Museum in London. And here is, it's steeper than the actual ramp, but here you can see Assyrian soldiers building ramps, attacking with their bows and with their siege equipment and with their siege towers. This is a picture of the siege of Lachish. You can even see refugees getting away from the burning city on the left. Very dramatic thing. The siege of Jerusalem did not go so well, however. Sennacherib went up to Jerusalem, but we're told in Isaiah and in 2 Kings and in the Chronicles that Sennacherib lost. His entire army was destroyed. He escaped with his life, but when he went home, we're told in the Assyrian Chronicles that Sennacherib was murdered by one of his sons. Still, he had time to produce a thing that we call the Sennacherib prism. I don't have a photograph of that, but we find it in Chicago today, which says, I shut up Hezekiah in Jerusalem, his royal city, like a bird in a cage. Again, another famous background correlation. So we know the dates for Sennacherib. We have his day books. And the Bible gives us really very good dates for Hezekiah. The existence of these people, the events that are shown here, all certainly, absolutely, positively happened. Jerusalem was not destroyed in 701. There was a siege, but Sennacherib left empty-handed after Hezekiah was shut up like a bird in a cage. Hezekiah's son was Manasseh, and he reigned for 45 years and was a thoroughly evil man. Tradition has it that Manasseh presided over the death of Isaiah. Manasseh paid tribute to Assyria and was eventually taken captive and imprisoned in Nineveh. This photograph on the left is a long shot of Mosul in Iraq, which is ancient Nineveh. Okay, Manasseh is followed by Ammon, who was briefly king. He was assassinated in a palace coup and was replaced by the last good king of Israel, whose name is Josiah. Josiah is well known for the cleansing of the temple in Jerusalem and also for shutting down the extra shrines that probably existed in a number of places around the country at that time. We know that the shrine at Arad, which is the picture on the right, was shut down during the reign of Josiah. That's when the temple area at Arad was simply filled up to the layer that you see here, which is filled up with rubble. And the Hasmonean Tower was built over the top of that. The critics have long associated the book of Deuteronomy with Josiah, and there's really no evidence to support the view. We're told that the people cleaning the temple found a book of the law, 2 Kings 22, toward the end of the book. And there's no doubt that it was a portion of scripture that had been lost. We don't know for sure what particular portion of scripture it was, but it was rediscovered, and that was a very big deal. It may have been a portion of the books of Moses, but we're not really told. The idea that the book of Deuteronomy was written at this time is simply not. It's not true. There's no evidence to support that. The pagans and non-Christians in general would like that to be true because Deuteronomy is awfully important, but it's not true. Moses wrote Deuteronomy, and there's no doubt about that. The end of Josiah's life is not quite what it should have been. The background of it all is the attempt to what's happening is the fall of the Assyrian Empire between 612 and 609 BC. The fall of Nineveh to a group of allies led by the Medes and the Babylonians came down on Nineveh in 612. The prophet Nahum vividly describes the fall of the city of Nineveh. And there was very likely no one in the ancient Near East outside of the hangers-on, the ruling elite of Assyria, who was unhappy about the fall of the northern kingdom, or of the fall of the Assyrian Empire. Anyway, Nineveh fell in 612. The Assyrian army regrouped in Haran, the same Haran, the northern tier of the Fertile Crescent at the foothills of Armenia, and they put their army back together, but that was wiped out in 610 through 609, a series of battles that take place there. The Assyrian army, or the Assyrian Empire, essentially ceased to exist in 612. Still, as this was all coming down, the Egyptians, for some strange reason, under a pharaoh named Necho, marched in support of the remnants of the Assyrian army. Why he would do that, I cannot imagine. He met the Babylonian army way up here in the north, in a place called Carchemish. For some reason, Josiah refused to allow Necho to pass peacefully. As you can see, Israel is on the road from Egypt to Carchemish, and if there's an old principle of warfare, if your enemy is making a mistake, leave him alone. let him be. Anyway, Josiah went out to try to stop Necho from passing through the land, and ended up dying in the battle. It's a sad thing because Josiah was a good man. Nevertheless, the Bible tells us right there in 2 Kings that it was God's intention to bring judgment on the kingdom of Judah, and judgment was going to fall. So in 609, Josiah died. He was replaced by a string of short-lived kings: Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, and Jehoiakim. There's ruins just to the south of Jerusalem called Ramat Rachel. And this was a fortress that was built during that period. Jeremiah prophesied during this time. His secretary is a character named Baruch, who left a bulla of his seal behind in Jeremiah's house in the city of David. And I think I've got a picture of that. Nebuchadnezzar invaded this place and destroyed the city and that house. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, destroyed the place. Jeremiah's house was covered in the rubble. Baruch's seal was found in one of the back rooms. It's actually a bulla. The bulla is the clay impression of a seal, and it's the sort of thing that would have been on a scroll. So something that Baruch wrote for Jeremiah, perhaps a letter, had that seal, which says, "This is the seal of Baruch, the son of Neriah." And we know that that's Jeremiah's secretary, his amanuensis. So very, very important guy. The last king of Judah after these guys was Zedekiah. And he was king very briefly after 606. Jerusalem was finally destroyed. The sons of Zedekiah were killed before his eyes. His eyes were put out and he was led off to slavery in Babylon. This is also the period of the famous Lachish ostraca. And there we have the Lachish ostraca, which are found within the gatehouse of the rebuilt Judean fortress of Lachish. And these 21, an ostraca is an inscription on a piece of potsherd or broken pottery. And every archaeologist hopes to find some. It was a gatehouse with 20 of these, 21 of these things. They're just, they're wonderful. You can see the ancient Hebrew writing, which is already taking on the square shape of the Aramaic. So the use of fire signals, similar to those of The Return of the King in the movie, is very interesting. The Lachish ostraca say we see the signals from so-and-so and from so-and-so, but the Babylonian king is on his way through and he's about to destroy the place. So Lachish was destroyed by Sennacherib. It was destroyed again by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. Now, also during this time, we hear nothing at all about the Ark of the Covenant. I mentioned before that the Ark of the Covenant probably was taken out by Shishak, the Egyptian, in 930 BC. The Ark of the Covenant was probably not rebuilt. They most likely made stone tablets to sit in the place of the original 10 Commandments. If there was an Ark of the Covenant still at this time, some traditions say it was hidden by the priests. Some say it was carried off to Ethiopia with Jeremiah. And that's what the Ethiopian church says today. Still others hold that it was taken earlier, and I think Shishak probably took the Ark of the Covenant. Anyway, that's the last of this section. We're going to quit here, and we'll come back next Monday and look at the Babylonian exile, Jeremiah's final days, and then off into the Babylonian exile. I think it's all kind of interesting stuff. Let me see if I can make this go away. And if I can make the, oh heavens, there we go. Stop sharing. Now here I am again. Okay. Thanks for joining me today. We'll see you again next Monday. And Oscar, you need to try to get some sleep. I'm just looking at you. I think there's a man that needs an hour or so of shut-eye before going back to work. Anyway, guys, God bless everybody. Thank you for joining. Love seeing you all. Love that.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. We'll see you next time.
Bye, Dr. John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Oscar.
God bless.
Ciao a tutti.
Bye-bye.